David Harper, a single dad and retired veteran, sat quietly in the middle seat of the airplane, staring out the tiny window at the clouds drifting lazily below. The hum of the engines filled the cabin with a steady, almost soothing rhythm. He had always preferred the quiet moments like this, where he could think about life, about his daughter Emma, and about the memories he had carried with him from years of service. The veteran life had given him discipline, pride, and a deep understanding of sacrifice, but it had also taught him that small acts of kindness often mattered more than medals or recognition. As he looked down at the endless sea of white clouds, his mind wandered to Emma, who must be waiting for him at home, probably hoping he would bring her favorite chocolate cookies and tell her stories about the city he had just visited. Emma was only 11, but she carried a maturity that amazed him. She had grown up learning from a father who had faced many battles, both on the field and in life, and she had developed a heart that was full of empathy and curiosity. The thought of her waiting for him, her face lighting up when she saw him, brought a gentle warmth to his chest. David adjusted his worn-out backpack under the seat in front of him. It was a simple bag, not expensive or flashy, but it carried everything he needed for travel and a few sentimental items that reminded him of the life he had built with Emma. Inside, tucked safely in a side pocket, was a small photograph of Emma with her school friends, all laughing under a bright summer sky. He had looked at this photo every day during the reunion, feeling both pride and longing. Life as a single dad was challenging, but moments like this quiet, reflective moments reminded him that everything he had endured was worth it. The flight attendant moved down the aisle with a warm smile, handing out drinks and snacks to the passengers. David noticed the familiar movements of someone dedicated to service, a reflection, perhaps, of his own years in the military. He had always respected people who gave themselves fully to their work, no matter how small or unnoticed the task might seem. That respect deepened when he caught sight of a woman struggling to adjust her seat belt in the first-class section. Her face was marked with soot and faint scars, her hands slightly trembling as she tried to make herself comfortable. Something about her presence drew his attention immediately. She didn't seem to belong in the luxurious seats of first class, yet she had a quiet dignity that made her stand out. She was calm but clearly tired, and her eyes, though filled with resilience, carried a shadow of pain that tugged at David's heart. As the flight attendant approached David with a polite offer, holding a small card that read, "Would you like to upgrade to first class?" he hesitated. For a brief moment, he felt the allure of comfort, of extra legroom, of being able to rest fully during the long flight. But then his eyes returned to the woman a few rows ahead, still struggling, still brave despite the obvious hardships she had endured. Without thinking twice, David stood up and gestured toward her. "Please," he said gently, "take my seat. You need it more than I do." The woman looked up at him, surprise and gratitude flooding her features. She hesitated, unsure if someone would truly offer such kindness to a stranger. Her voice was soft, almost a whisper, as she replied, "Thank you. I don't know what to say." David shook his head, smiling in that calm, reassuring way that soldiers often do. "You don't need to say anything. Just sit and be comfortable. That's enough for me." As she made her way to his seat, David returned to the cramped middle seat, feeling a mix of emotions. There was a small ache in his chest, a natural response to giving up something for someone else, but it was accompanied by a profound warmth that made the tight space of the economy cabin feel like a home. He settled back, adjusting his jacket and closing his eyes for a moment. In that short pause, memories from his own life surfaced, memories of standing in lines to give others a helping hand, of moments where sacrifice had been more important than personal comfort. He thought about the day Emma had learned to ride her bike. He had stayed behind her, running alongside, ready to catch her if she fell. The joy in her laughter, the pride in her accomplishment, had reminded him that giving oneself fully to another person could create magic, even in small ways. The flight continued, and David watched as the woman in first class finally leaned back, her breathing easing, her face softening into a rare, genuine smile. From this distance, he could see the relief and gratitude in her eyes, and it reminded him of why he had chosen to serve, why he had chosen kindness even when it was inconvenient. The act itself had no fanfare, no applause, but it carried a silent weight, a quiet power that only those who truly understood life could appreciate. As the hours passed, David reflected on the paths that had led both of them here. His life had been shaped by duty and love, the duty to serve his country, the duty to be a father, and the love that guided him through every decision. He imagined the woman's story, piecing together the resilience and courage she must have had to endure the challenges that life had thrown at her. In some way, he felt connected to her, bound by the universal understanding that sometimes, life demanded sacrifices, and sometimes, it demanded acts of kindness that required nothing more than a generous heart. He looked out of the window again, seeing the sun dipping below the horizon, painting the clouds in shades of orange and pink. The sight reminded him of Emma's fascination with sunsets and how they would sit together on quiet evenings, watching the sky transform and sharing dreams for the future. That simple beauty, that unspoken connection, gave him hope and renewed his faith in the goodness of people. Even though he had given up the comfort of first class, David felt a strange sense of reward. It wasn't the luxurious seat or extra legroom that mattered, it was the knowledge that he had made a difference, even in a small, unseen way. In his heart, he knew that life was measured not by what one took, but by what one gave. The woman's smile, her quiet gratitude, and the relief in her posture were enough to fill him with a sense of fulfillment that no seat or privilege could ever provide. As the plane continued its journey, the cabin lights dimmed, and passengers settled into their own worlds, David closed his eyes and allowed himself a moment of reflection. He thought about Emma, about the lessons he hoped she would carry with her, and about the unexpected ways life could connect strangers through simple acts of generosity. He imagined telling her about this experience when he returned home, not seeking recognition or fame, but simply sharing a story about kindness and the quiet heroism that existed in everyday life. Through the hum of the airplane and the soft murmur of passengers, David felt a calm determination settle over him. Life had taught him that moments like these were rare and precious, and he intended to cherish them fully. For the rest of the flight, he remained content in his seat, his heart quietly full, knowing that sometimes, the smallest gestures could leave the deepest impact. And as the plane soared above the clouds, David Harper, the humble veteran and devoted father, understood something essential: courage was not always about battles or bravery on the field. Sometimes, courage was simply giving up a seat so someone else could find comfort, so a stranger could feel seen, and so a world that often felt harsh could be reminded of the gentle power of compassion. The morning after the flight, David Harper woke up in his small cabin in Virginia, the sunlight streaming gently through the window and casting warm patterns across the wooden floor. The quiet of the early morning was comforting, broken only by the soft chirping of birds outside and the occasional rustle of leaves in the gentle breeze. David stretched his arms and took a deep breath, feeling the calm that always seemed to fill this place he called home. His thoughts immediately went to Emma, who had probably woken up early and was now sitting at the kitchen table, eagerly waiting for the breakfast he promised. As he shuffled to the kitchen, he poured himself a cup of coffee and leaned against the counter, letting the steam rise to his face and carry a sense of normalcy. He felt content, yet there was a lingering thought at the back of his mind about the woman from the plane, the one he had given his first-class seat to. He didn't know her name, but her eyes, tired yet full of strength, had left an impression he could not shake. He had thought about her the entire flight back, wondering what her life had been like and why she had appeared so fragile, yet so strong, in the face of obvious hardships. He shook his head, smiling softly to himself, telling himself it was just one small act, nothing extraordinary, and yet the memory refused to leave him. As he scrolled through his phone, intending to check the usual messages from friends and updates from work, a news notification caught his attention. At first, he thought it was just another story he would scroll past, but as he read the headline, his heart skipped a beat. Local veteran honored for compassionate act on flight, Marine One makes surprise visit. David blinked, rereading the words to make sure he understood correctly. The story featured a photograph of him, sitting humbly in the middle seat of the plane, smiling gently as the woman from the previous day took his place in first class. The article described the act as one of unexpected kindness, noting that the story had quickly gone viral, reaching thousands of people and even catching the attention of officials at the White House. David's first reaction was disbelief. How could something so simple, something he thought was just a natural gesture, become newsworthy? He leaned against the counter, gripping his coffee mug tightly as he tried to process the sudden attention. He felt an odd mix of emotions: pride, embarrassment, and a humble disbelief that anyone would care about a small act of decency in such a grand way. Emma burst into the kitchen moments later, her face bright with excitement, her eyes sparkling as she pointed at the phone in his hand. "Dad? Is that really you? They're talking about you on TV," she exclaimed, barely able to contain her enthusiasm. David chuckled, setting the mug down and kneeling to be at eye level with her. "Yes, sweetie, that's me," he said softly. Emma's hands flew to her cheeks as she processed the moment, jumping slightly with excitement. "Dad, this is amazing. Everyone is going to know how kind you are." David shook his head with a gentle smile. "Emma, it's not about being kind for everyone to see. It's about doing the right thing when you can. That's all," he replied, feeling a warm pride in the way she had absorbed the lesson. He knew, however, that the story's reach had already grown beyond just the two of them, and he couldn't help but wonder what would happen next. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of phone calls, texts, and messages from friends and neighbors congratulating him on the recognition. Some were simple notes of appreciation, while others were more formal, expressing admiration for his generosity. David listened politely, thanked each person sincerely, and then retreated to the porch with his coffee, taking a moment to collect his thoughts. He looked at the familiar trees surrounding his cabin, the gentle flow of the nearby creek, and the wildflowers swaying in the morning sun. Despite the sudden attention, there was a comforting consistency in the world around him, a reminder that life continued quietly and beautifully even when unexpected moments arrived. David reflected on the importance of staying grounded, knowing that moments of recognition could come and go, but the choices he made, small as they might be, were the real measure of who he was. Around midday, a soft rumble sounded in the distance, unusual yet distinct. David squinted at the sky, noticing a helicopter slowly approaching the cabin from afar. His stomach tightened with anticipation, though he couldn't yet imagine who it could be. Emma, who had been quietly observing the movement, tugged at his sleeve. "Dad, look. It's a helicopter." "Do you think it's for you?" she asked, her voice filled with awe. David shook his head, half laughing and half anxious. "I don't know, Emma. Maybe it's just a coincidence, he replied, though deep down, he felt a growing sense that this event was connected to the story from the flight. The helicopter descended carefully, landing in the small clearing near their home. David stepped outside with Emma, holding her hand tightly as they approached the landing area. His heart beat faster as the realization dawned on him that this was no ordinary visit. From the helicopter, a group of people emerged, moving with quiet purpose and respect. Among them was the woman from the plane, walking steadily toward him with the same calm dignity that had captured his attention the previous day. Her presence was striking, yet warm, as if she carried a light of resilience that drew people in without words. David's breath caught in his throat as she approached, and Emma's eyes widened with recognition and admiration. "Dad, it's her," she whispered, her voice a mixture of wonder and excitement. David took a deep breath, steadying himself as the woman reached him. "David Harper," she asked softly, a gentle smile gracing her face. "Yes," he replied, his voice slightly shaky but filled with warmth. "I wanted to thank you personally for your kindness," she continued. "You didn't just give up a seat. You gave comfort and hope when it was most needed. That small act, it means more than words can express." David felt a lump in his throat as he tried to respond. It was nothing. Anyone would have done the same, he said, shaking his head in humble disbelief. Emma squeezed his hand, clearly proud of her father, while the woman laughed softly, shaking her head. "No, David. That's exactly why it matters. Not everyone acts with such selflessness. You reminded people that simple kindness can be heroic," she said, her voice carrying both sincerity and admiration. For a moment, David simply stood there, overwhelmed by the unexpected attention and the recognition for something he had considered a quiet gesture of decency. The realization that one small act could ripple through the lives of so many people, including those who would never meet him, filled him with both humility and awe. The group from the helicopter lingered, offering polite congratulations and warm smiles, while David and Emma welcomed them near the cabin. The sun was high in the sky, bathing everything in a golden light that seemed to amplify the sense of occasion. The woman handed David a small envelope, simple yet elegant. "This is a token of appreciation from those who have seen your story," she said, her eyes filled with warmth. David opened the envelope carefully, discovering a handwritten note expressing gratitude, admiration, and the hope that his actions would inspire others to show kindness in their own lives. Tears pricked at his eyes as he read the heartfelt words, and Emma wrapped her arms around his leg, sharing in the emotion of the moment. As the visit concluded, David and Emma watched the helicopter lift back into the sky, carrying the woman and her companions away. The quiet that returned to the cabin felt different now, charged with a sense of purpose and hope. David turned to Emma, kneeling to meet her gaze. "Sweetheart, remember this," he said softly. "Life is full of moments where we can make a difference, even in the smallest ways. Today, we saw how one simple choice can touch many hearts. Never forget that." Emma nodded solemnly, her young face reflecting both understanding and admiration for her father. Together, they walked back into the cabin, hearts full and spirits lifted, knowing that the world was a place where kindness could be celebrated, and even the smallest acts could create waves of hope that reached far beyond their own lives. The following afternoon, the quiet serenity of David Harper's cabin was shattered by a deep, distant roar that made the windows vibrate slightly and the leaves of the surrounding trees shiver. Emma, who had been sitting on the porch reading a book, jumped to her feet, her eyes wide with excitement and curiosity. "Dad! Dad! Look at the sky," she shouted, pointing toward the horizon where a dark green helicopter approached, its rotors slicing through the air with a rhythmic, powerful beat. David felt his heart race as he stepped outside, shielding his eyes from the sun glinting off the metal surface. He immediately recognized the aircraft. It was Marine One, the presidential helicopter, descending gracefully toward the clearing near his home. A surreal mixture of awe, disbelief, and nervous anticipation flooded his senses. David's mind raced as he tried to comprehend how his small act of kindness on a commercial flight had reached such a height, drawing the attention of people in positions of extraordinary influence. He held Emma's hand tightly, feeling her small fingers entwined with his, and tried to steady both his racing heart and the whirlwind of thoughts swirling in his mind. As the helicopter hovered closer, the wind from its rotors whipped around them, tossing David's hair and sending Emma's book pages fluttering wildly, and yet he felt a strange sense of calm in the midst of the extraordinary scene unfolding before him. The sound of the rotors slowly softened as Marine One landed in the clearing, kicking up a small cloud of dust and leaves, and a team of aides and officials began to emerge, moving with careful coordination and unmistakable purpose. Among the group, David spotted the woman from the flight, walking steadily with the same quiet dignity and calm strength he had admired the previous day. She smiled warmly at him, and his chest tightened with a mix of emotion and humility. As she approached, David realized that this visit was not simply a gesture of recognition, it was a personal acknowledgement of the ripple effect his simple choice had created, reaching all the way to the highest levels of admiration and respect. Emma tugged at his sleeve, her voice full of wonder. "Dad, it's really her. And the helicopter, it's Marine One. Are they really here for you?" David nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat, feeling both overwhelmed and honored. He could hardly believe that a moment he had considered so ordinary, giving up a seat on an airplane, had led to this incredible, once-in-a-lifetime experience. The woman reached David, offering her hand in a gesture of both gratitude and respect. "David Harper," she said gently, her voice calm yet commanding attention, "we wanted to thank you personally for your kindness. What you did on that flight was more than a gesture. It was an act of courage, compassion, and humanity that deserves to be recognized." David shook his head, his voice husky with emotion. I didn't do anything special. I just thought she needed the seat more than I did," he replied, his words humble but sincere. Emma squeezed his hand, proud beyond words, as the woman smiled softly, shaking her head. "Exactly, David. That is what makes it extraordinary. True kindness does not seek reward. You acted selflessly, and in doing so, you reminded the world of the power of compassion. Sometimes, the simplest choices can make the greatest impact." The sun shone brightly, casting golden light over the clearing and illuminating the awestruck expressions of the neighbors who had gathered to witness the extraordinary moment. Cameras clicked from a respectful distance, but David barely noticed them, focusing instead on the significance of the moment, a quiet, humble man recognized not for fame or accomplishments, but for the goodness of his heart. The woman extended a small envelope to him, a simple but elegant token of appreciation, and he accepted it with shaking hands. Inside was a handwritten note, beautifully penned, expressing gratitude and admiration and stating that his actions had inspired countless others to act with kindness and selflessness in their own lives. David's eyes filled with tears as he read the heartfelt words, and Emma wrapped her arms around his leg, sharing the emotion of the moment in a quiet, profound way that made the experience even more real and unforgettable. The team accompanying the woman, a mix of officials and aides, spoke briefly to David and Emma, offering congratulations and explaining that the visit was intended to honor his gesture and to share the story as a reminder of the importance of human kindness. David listened politely, responding with humility and gratitude, while trying to process the extraordinary events unfolding around him. He glanced at Emma, whose eyes were wide with admiration, and felt a deep sense of pride. This was more than recognition, it was a teaching moment, one that would shape Emma's understanding of the world, of courage, and of the quiet strength that comes from doing the right thing without expectation. For a moment, the noise of the helicopter, the distant hum of cameras, and the murmurs of the crowd faded into the background. David simply stood there, holding his daughter's hand, and let himself absorb the moment, feeling an overwhelming sense of connection, not just to the people in front of him, but to the countless strangers whose lives had been touched by the story of simple, heartfelt kindness. As the formalities concluded, the woman spoke once more, her voice calm but firm, carrying the weight of sincerity. "David, the world is a better place because of people like you. What you did may have seemed small to you, but it is a powerful reminder that one act of generosity can inspire millions." David nodded, tears brimming in his eyes, and could only whisper, I just did what I felt was right." Emma, looking up at him with admiration, squeezed his hand and said softly, "Dad, you're my hero." The words struck David deeply, and he realized that, beyond the recognition and the extraordinary experience of being honored by Marine One, the true reward was in seeing the values he had tried to instill in Emma reflected back in her own words and actions. The helicopter's rotors began to spin again, signaling the end of the visit, and David and Emma watched as Marine One lifted gracefully into the sky, carrying with it the woman and the team that had come to honor him. The sight was breathtaking, a perfect symbol of how far a single act of kindness could reach, and David felt a renewed sense of purpose, understanding that even in quiet, everyday life, one could make a profound difference in the world. After the helicopter disappeared into the distance, leaving the clearing peaceful once more, David and Emma walked back toward their cabin. The golden sunlight bathed everything in warmth, and the gentle sounds of nature seemed to celebrate the extraordinary day they had just experienced. Neighbors who had gathered earlier came forward to offer congratulations, their smiles and words of appreciation adding to the sense of fulfillment and quiet joy that David felt. He spoke briefly with each of them, maintaining his humility, reminding them that anyone could choose to act with kindness, and that even small gestures could have far-reaching effects. Emma skipped ahead a few steps, pausing to pick a wildflower and hand it to her father, a small symbol of love and connection that reflected the simple yet powerful beauty of life. David accepted it with a smile, holding it gently, and realized that the moment, though remarkable, was part of a much larger picture, the importance of kindness, empathy, and human connection in everyday life. As the day ended, David and Emma sat together on the porch, watching the sun dip behind the trees and paint the sky in shades of pink and orange. David wrapped his arm around his daughter, feeling the steady beat of her heart against his side, and thought about the events that had unfolded: the flight, the act of giving up a seat, the woman's gratitude, and the extraordinary visit from Marine One. He understood now that life was filled with moments of opportunity, moments where one could choose to act with generosity, courage, and compassion. The recognition, the attention, and even the honor were secondary to the feeling of having done something that mattered, that brought comfort, hope, and inspiration to others. He whispered to Emma, "Sweetheart, remember this. Life is full of chances to make a difference. It doesn't take fame or power to do good. Sometimes, all it takes is a kind heart and the courage to do the right thing." Emma leaned against him, her eyes reflecting the fading light of the sunset, and replied softly, "I'll remember, Dad. I promise." Together, they sat in peaceful silence, hearts full, knowing that the simple act of kindness on a plane had blossomed into a story of hope, connection, and inspiration, and that the world, through their small but meaningful actions, could indeed be a better place. After the extraordinary visit from Marine One, David Harper found himself in a swirl of emotions that he could hardly explain. The events of the past 2 days seemed almost unreal, yet the memories remained vivid. The woman from the plane, her gentle words of gratitude, the helicopter landing in his own backyard, and the overwhelming sense that a single act of kindness could reach further than he had ever imagined. That evening, as the golden sunlight faded into a gentle twilight, a small delivery truck pulled up to the cabin. The driver handed him a neatly wrapped package, and the label indicated it had been sent by the White House. David opened it carefully, his hands slightly trembling, and inside was a small, polished wooden box, simple yet elegant, its surface smooth and warm to the touch. Emma, standing beside him, leaned forward eagerly, her eyes wide with curiosity. David lifted the lid and discovered a Medal of Honor, not for combat, not for military achievement, but for the courage and compassion he had shown in an everyday act of selflessness. His heart tightened with emotion as he held it in his hands, feeling the weight of both the object and the meaning behind it. The medal was accompanied by a note, carefully written, expressing the admiration of people who had seen the story and explaining that his gesture had inspired others to act with kindness and humanity. David read the note aloud to Emma, his voice quivering slightly, and as he did, he felt a profound sense of humility and gratitude. He looked at his daughter, whose eyes glistened with tears of joy and pride, and he realized that in that moment, she was learning one of the most important lessons of her young life: the quiet power of compassion, the courage to act selflessly, and the extraordinary impact a single choice could have. David reflected on the journey that had brought him here. His life as a single father had been filled with challenges, sacrifices, and responsibilities that often left him exhausted, yet he had always believed that the small choices we make, the acts of kindness we perform without expectation, are what truly define a person. The recognition he received now was unexpected, but it reminded him that the simplest gestures often carry the most meaning. He remembered the look on the woman's face when he had offered his seat on the plane, the subtle relief in her expression, and the way her eyes had shone with gratitude. That memory had stayed with him throughout the flight home, and now, seeing the medal and the note, he understood that the ripple effect of that moment had reached far beyond what he could have imagined. Emma, still holding his hand, whispered, "Dad, this is amazing. People will remember what you did forever." David smiled softly, shaking his head in humility. "Emma, I hope they remember, but not because of the medal or the attention. I hope they remember because kindness is always the right choice. That's the real reward." Over the next few days, the cabin was filled with visitors, neighbors, and community members who had learned of the story. They came with flowers, letters, and simple words of admiration, not for fame or recognition, but to share in the celebration of humanity and compassion. David welcomed them all with quiet grace, always emphasizing that anyone could choose to act with kindness, and that even small, thoughtful gestures could change someone's day or even someone's life. Emma joined in, smiling shyly as she handed out cups of lemonade and cookies, proud to be part of the shared experience of gratitude and joy. David watched her and felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing that the lessons he had tried to teach her through his actions were taking root. He thought about the woman from the plane, imagining her continuing her life with a renewed sense of hope and the memory of a stranger's compassion that had lifted her in a moment of need. The realization that one act could resonate so strongly and inspire others filled him with a sense of purpose that went beyond the recognition itself. One afternoon, the woman returned, not with cameras or crowds, but simply to visit, to express her thanks in person and to see the family whose small but powerful gesture had touched her so deeply. She brought no gifts, No speeches, just herself, radiating the same calm dignity and gratitude that had first caught David's attention. "David," she said softly, "I wanted to tell you again how much that moment meant to me. It wasn't just about the seed. It was about seeing that someone cared, that someone noticed my struggle, that someone was willing to act without expecting anything in return. You reminded me that humanity is alive, even in the smallest acts." David nodded, feeling the familiar lump of emotion in his throat. "It really was nothing," he replied humbly, though he now understood that sometimes, nothing could mean everything to someone else. Emma hugged her father's leg, whispering, "Dad, you really are a hero." David smiled, wrapping his arms around her, feeling the profound truth of her words resonate deeply within him. The woman stayed a while, sharing stories of her work, the challenges she had faced, and the people she had helped, and David listened intently, feeling inspired by her resilience and her dedication. In return, he shared simple stories of his own, of the lessons he hoped to instill in Emma, and of the belief that the world could be a better place if people chose to act with kindness and courage whenever they could. As the evening approached, David and Emma stood together on the porch, watching the sky glow with the colors of sunset. The wooden box with the medal sat on the table beside them, a symbol not of personal achievement, but of the quiet power of goodness. David held Emma close, feeling her small heartbeat against his chest, and whispered, "Sweetheart, this is what life is about. It's not about recognition or awards. It's about choosing to do the right thing, even when no one is watching. That's what makes a person truly remarkable." Emma nodded solemnly, her young mind absorbing the lesson with clarity and understanding. She looked out at the trees, the creek, and the wildflowers swaying in the breeze, realizing that even the smallest actions could create a ripple of hope and positivity in the world. David smiled, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing that the story of the flight, the act of giving up his seat, and the recognition that followed would remain with them not as a tale of fame, but as a lesson in humanity, compassion, and the quiet heroism that exists in everyday life. Over the following weeks, life returned to a gentle rhythm, but the impact of the events remained ever present. Letters continued to arrive from strangers who had read about the story, each one filled with appreciation, encouragement, and accounts of how David's simple act had inspired them to act with kindness in their own lives. The cabin, once quiet and secluded, became a small center of warmth and inspiration, where people shared stories of compassion and generosity, and where David and Emma felt the tangible effects of their experience ripple outward into the lives of others. David often reflected on the extraordinary journey from a quiet, unassuming flight to the arrival of Marine One, to the personal acknowledgement from the woman he had helped, and finally to the medal that now rested on the table beside him. He realized that true recognition was not about public attention or accolades, but about the unseen impact of one person's choices on the hearts and minds of countless others. As David and Emma prepared for bed each night, they would sit by the window, gazing at the stars, discussing the importance of kindness, courage, and empathy. David understood that these moments, though small in the grand scheme of the world, were monumental in shaping the values and character of a young life. He whispered to Emma each night, "Remember, my dear, you have the power to change the world, one kind act at a time," and she would smile, holding his hand tightly, her eyes reflecting both love and determination. In that quiet, peaceful cabin, surrounded by nature, filled with love and the lingering echoes of a story that had touched so many hearts, David Harper understood that the real reward of life was not in medals or recognition, but in the lasting impression of kindness, the joy of helping others, and the simple, profound knowledge that even the smallest gestures could inspire courage, hope, and happiness in the lives of others. Life gradually returned to its gentle rhythm at David Harper's cabin, but the extraordinary events of the past weeks had left a lasting impression on both him and Emma, weaving themselves into the quiet fabric of their everyday lives. The story of the flight, the first-class seat, the grateful woman, and the visit from Marine One had captured national attention, yet for David, the true meaning of it all was much deeper than fame or recognition. Each morning, he and Emma would sit together on the porch, sipping coffee or hot chocolate, watching the sunrise spill golden light across the trees and the creek that ran beside their home. They spoke often about kindness, courage, and the power of small choices, and David felt proud to see Emma absorbing these lessons, her young mind filled with empathy and understanding. The wooden box containing the medal from the White House sat on a shelf in the living room, polished and gleaming, but David rarely spoke about it, knowing that the real reward had never been the medal itself. It had been the ripple effect of his actions, the lives touched, and the hope inspired in both strangers and neighbors alike. Letters continued to arrive from people who had read about his gesture, filled with stories of how they had been encouraged to act with compassion in their own communities, and David shared many of these letters with Emma, showing her how one small act could grow far beyond what anyone could imagine. The cabin, once a quiet retreat, had become a small beacon of warmth, connection, and inspiration, and David often marveled at how life's simplest choices could create such profound change. He and Emma would walk in the woods behind their cabin, picking wildflowers and talking about the importance of noticing when someone needed help, just as he had noticed the woman on the plane. Each flower, each small discovery, became a metaphor for the beauty of life and the power of generosity, and David felt grateful for the opportunity to teach Emma lessons that he hoped she would carry with her forever. One afternoon, a group of local children came to the cabin, curious after hearing about David's story. Emma eagerly led them around the property, showing them the creek, the garden, and the small clearing where Marine One had once landed. David watched quietly as the children's eyes lit up with wonder, realizing that these moments were shaping their understanding of kindness and heroism just as much as they had shaped Emma's. Parents lingered nearby, some asking questions, others quietly observing, and David felt a warm sense of community, knowing that the story of a simple act on an airplane had touched hearts far beyond the original moment. He spoke to the children gently, sharing the lesson that courage was not always about grand gestures or public recognition, but about doing the right thing when it mattered most, even when no one was watching. He told them that one small choice like offering a seat to someone who needed it more could inspire hope, comfort, and kindness in ways that were often invisible but deeply meaningful. Emma listened attentively, her heart full, and the children's excitement mirrored her own sense of awe and admiration, and David realized that this was a moment of teaching, of passing on values, and of ensuring that the message of compassion continued to grow in the world around him. Evenings at the cabin had taken on a new significance. David and Emma would sit quietly by the porch swing, listening to the gentle flow of the creek and the rustle of leaves in the breeze. The stars would appear one by one in the darkening sky, and David often used these moments to reflect on life, on the extraordinary chain of events that had followed a single act of generosity, and on the lessons he hoped to pass to his daughter. He thought about the woman from the plane and her strength, courage, and quiet dignity, imagining that she continued her work and her life with renewed hope and the memory of someone's kindness still shining in her heart. David understood that the world could be a difficult place, but that acts of compassion had the power to transform fear, uncertainty, and loneliness into reassurance, connection, and warmth. Emma would rest her head against his shoulder, and he would whisper to her softly, reinforcing the values he hoped she would carry into her future: empathy, courage, humility, and the quiet heroism of everyday kindness. She would listen, absorbing each word, and sometimes respond with her own thoughtful reflections, showing him that the lessons of life were being internalized, that the seed of compassion he had planted in her heart was already growing. Weeks turned into months, and life at the cabin settled into a comforting routine, yet the story of David's simple act continued to ripple outward. Community events, school projects, and even small local gatherings often referenced the story, emphasizing the importance of kindness, integrity, and human connection. David and Emma participated when they could, speaking to children and adults alike, always careful to focus on the principles rather than the attention or accolades. David knew that true heroism was measured not by applause, but by the choices people made every day to help, to comfort, and to uplift those around them. Emma, inspired by her father's example, began initiating small acts of kindness herself, whether helping a friend in need, offering encouragement to classmates, or simply being attentive to someone who needed a smile. David watched these moments with a full heart, recognizing that the impact of one simple act, giving up a seat on an airplane, had grown into something far greater, influencing not only strangers across the country but also shaping the character of his own daughter in profound and lasting ways. One particular evening, David and Emma sat by the fire pit in the backyard, the flames flickering softly, casting warm light across their faces. David held a small journal in his hands, a place where he had recorded thoughts, reflections, and moments of gratitude. He read aloud passages he had written about the woman from the plane, the reaction of the public, and the deep satisfaction he had felt in witnessing the ripple effect of kindness. Emma listened, her eyes reflecting both curiosity and admiration, and she asked thoughtful questions about courage, choices, and the importance of noticing when someone needed help. David answered as best he could, emphasizing that the power to make a difference existed in each person, in every small decision to act with empathy and compassion. He told her that medals, attention, or recognition were fleeting, but the lasting impact of helping someone, of lifting their spirits, and of inspiring hope was immeasurable. As the fire crackled and the night deepened, they both sat in comfortable silence, understanding that life's most meaningful moments were often quiet, intimate, and rooted in simple gestures that demonstrated love, care, and humanity. As the stars sparkled overhead, David reflected on the extraordinary journey that had begun with a seemingly ordinary flight. He thought about how giving up his first-class seat had led to a moment of profound connection, a visit from Marine One, the heartfelt gratitude of the woman, and the realization that one small act could inspire countless others. He understood now that life was full of such opportunities, moments where one could choose to act with courage, kindness, and selflessness. The story had given him a renewed sense of purpose, strengthened his bond with Emma, and reminded him that the world, despite its challenges, was full of people willing to make it better, one thoughtful action at a time. Emma rested her head against his shoulder, and he whispered once more, "Sweetheart, never forget that you have the power to change someone's life with just a small act of kindness. It may not always be noticed immediately, but it will matter, and it will grow." She nodded, smiling softly, understanding the depth of her father's words, and together, they watched the night sky, feeling the quiet strength of hope, the warmth of love, and the enduring power of simple, heartfelt humanity. In the weeks and months that followed, David and Emma continued their lives with a renewed sense of purpose and joy. The cabin became a place of learning, reflection, and inspiration for neighbors, friends, and even strangers who visited. David understood that recognition, medals, and public attention were secondary to the true impact of one's choices. The story of a burned woman, a first-class seat, and a small act of generosity had become a symbol of hope, courage, and the quiet heroism that existed in every human heart. David Harper, the humble veteran and devoted father, had discovered that life's most meaningful moments were often unplanned, simple, and deeply personal, yet capable of creating waves of inspiration far beyond what one could ever imagine. Sitting on the porch with Emma, holding her hand, watching the stars, he realized that the journey was not about accolades, but about love, kindness, and the understanding that every person had the power to make the world a better place through their choices, their actions, and their hearts. In that quiet cabin, surrounded by nature, filled with love, and guided by the lessons of the past, David and Emma Harper found peace, purpose, and the enduring truth that compassion, courage, and humanity were the greatest legacies anyone could leave.